DSLRs are simply the best budget options in photography today. Camera manufacturers are at war designing the best mirrorless cameras. So now is the perfect time to take a couple of steps back, avoid the trend, and get yourself a DSLR. If you are watching this video, you are most likely determined to get a DSLR in the age of mirrorless. But before you actually get an old DSLR, here are 10 important things to consider to help you choose the DSLR that's right for you. The first one is the viewfinder. Yes, the viewfinder. For me, the main reason to get an old DSLR, even if you already have a mirrorless camera, is the optical viewfinder or the OVF. The experience of using a DSLR's OVF is totally different from using an EVF. With an OVF, you are actually seeing directly through the lens. On the other hand, on EVF is basically just looking at small digital screen. Make sure the OVF of your desired DSLR is clean and bright. For example, the Olympus E500 has a not so convenient OVF. It's small, like a tunnel. My particular copy is a bit foggy due to aging, so I miss focus a lot with this camera. Meanwhile, the Olympus E420 has a much better OVF, way brighter, which makes it easier to manually focus, especially if you like using vintage manual lenses like I do. So yes, a bright, clean OVF is 100% a must when it comes to DSLRs. As a fan of manual focusing lenses, I can say that manual focusing with an OVF is way more enjoyable than using an EVF. The second is sensor size. Obviously, you have plenty of options: 4/3, APS-C, full frame, or even medium format. I won't get into the debate about which size is best, but if you are getting an old DSLR, I highly recommend going for a full frame DSLR. It's probably the cheapest way to try a full frame digital camera. For example, you can get a Canon 5D Classic or any full frame DSLR really. And the number 3 is the brand. Choosing a camera brand comes down to a few considerations. First, there is the so-called color science, basically how each brand designs their cameras to interpret colors into the images. There are tons of YouTube videos comparing the color science of different brands. Sure, there are general characteristics of each brand, but even cameras within the same brand can produce different results depending on the series. Also, think about how much you want to customize the colors in your images. Some brands offer more customization options than others. I personally love tweaking settings in camera to get a more filmic look in JPEGs, so these features matter to me. I've experimented with different camera brands. You can check out my experiments on my channel. They are not perfect, but hey, I gave it a shot, and I'll do more in the future. For me though, the camera brand is not just about color science, it's also about the lens mount. Yeah, and that is the number 4, lens mount. If you are a fan of vintage lenses like me, the camera's lens mount is super important. Take Pentax, for example. They've been using the Pentax key mount for decades, even in their latest DSLRs. Yes, Pentax is still making DSLRs and might be the last brand standing in the DSLR world instead of fully going mirrorless. If you get a Pentax DSLR, you'll have access to a massive collection of native vintage Pentax key mount lenses. No adapters needed, they are native to your camera. For example, I have the Pentax MSMC 150mm f3.5 and the Reconon 50mm f2. Both of these vintage lenses work perfectly with Pentax key mount DSLRs. The same goes for Nikon f-mount, which has a huge collection of lenses, especially if you are on a budget. Even if you need an adapter for mounting vintage lenses across camera brands, adapters for DSLRs are generally thinner and less bulky than those for mirrorless cameras. Mirrorless adapters for vintage lenses can be thick and ugly, which is why I'm not a huge fan of adapting vintage lenses to mirrorless cameras. So yes, lens mount is a big deal, especially if you have favorite vintage or new lenses. If you prefer autofocus lenses, please keep in mind that some lens mounts, like the original 4/3 mount, have very limited lens options. And the number 5 is live view options. Be aware that not all old DSLRs have live view, especially the earliest models. Without live view, you are stuck shooting through the viewfinder with no option to use the back LCD. This can be tricky if you like shooting from low angles or other challenging positions. And then the number 6 is hybrid or stills only. Do you want a hybrid camera, or are you focused solely on still photography? If you are into hybrid shooting, you'll need to check if the camera has features like an audio jack or good video specs. But if you are mainly shooting stills like I do, you'll have plenty of options. And the number 7 is battery and charger. Try to avoid a camera sold without a battery and charger unless they are insanely cheap. For some DSLR series, it can be tough to find replacements for this, and sellers might charge high prices for batteries and chargers. For example, the battery and charger for my E500 were hard to find in Indonesia. I had to jump between online stores and ended up buying a bit of a premium because it was the only one available, so keep this in mind. And the number 8 is size and weight. This might seem unimportant, but it's worth considering. Switching back to DSLRs means moving away from the sleek, stealthy, mirrorless camera trend. If you are committing to a DSLR, why not embrace the big, chunky design? Cameras like the Pentax K1, Nikon D200, or Canon 1D make a bold statement like, "I'm here to take photos." On the other hand, if you prefer a smaller, sleeker DSLR, something like the Olympus E420 might suit you better. Also, think about weight. Can you handle carrying a 1 kilogram camera body like the Pentax K1 for an hour of street photography? Well, sometimes the question isn't about whether you can or cannot, but more about whether you want to or don't want to. And the number 9 is shutter count. Well, the ideal way is to have the least shutter count possible on an old DSLR, because there are more moving parts on DSLRs than on a mirrorless camera. But oftentimes these old DSLRs can surpass their shutter ratings by a lot. Entry-level and mid-range DSLR cameras typically have a shutter count rating between 100,000 to 200,000, while professional grade cameras can range between 400,000 to 500,000. Just something to keep in mind. And the last but not least is collectors versus normal DSLRs. Finally, decide whether you want a regular DSLR or a collector's piece. Some DSLRs like the Nikon DFs still have high asking prices because of their classic DSLR inspired design. DSLRs with CCD sensor such as Kodak made or Super CCDs also have a fan base. There is even the Viewfinder sensor in the Sigma cameras, for example. You can either chase these hypes or avoid them and go for a more normal DSLR at a cheaper price. Either way, it's a win. What do you think? Do you have any other suggestions to consider before getting an old DSLR? Leave your thoughts in the comments section below. See you around, I guess, and remember, keep snapping and keep your budget tight. Au revoir.